In dimensional rendering theory, the world we experience is not reality in itself. It is a rendered dimensional slice, a structured presentation in which space, time, objects, and events appear in stable, coherent forms. From this perspective, many of the deepest confusions in physics and philosophy come from a very simple mistake. We take concepts that belong inside this rendered slice and try to apply them to the limits or conditions of the slice itself. That mistake has a name: a category error. Nowhere is this more obvious than in how we think about the Big Bang. Welcome to Dimensions. I'm Bill, and I'll be your host for today's episode. We almost can't help asking it. What happened before the Big Bang? Was there something else? Another universe? An empty void? A previous cycle? The question feels natural because in our everyday experience, everything happens in time. There is always a before, there is always an earlier moment behind the present one. But in both modern cosmology and in dimensional rendering theory, time is not a background container. Time is part of the rendered dimensional slice itself. And according to our best theories, the Big Bang is not something that happened in time. It is the earliest boundary of time itself. So when we ask what happened before the Big Bang, we are already committing a category error. We are using a time-based concept, before, in a place where time does not yet exist. That's like asking what's north of the North Pole. The problem isn't that we don't know the answer. The problem is that the question no longer has a place to stand. But there is a second, even more powerful source of confusion. A lot of people imagine the Big Bang as a gigantic explosion, a fireball going off at some point in space, throwing matter and galaxies outward into an already existing emptiness. That picture is completely wrong. The Big Bang was not an explosion in space. It was the beginning of space. It did not happen at a location. It is the reason locations exist at all. There was no center. There was no surrounding void. There was no place where it happened and other places where it did not. Every place comes from it because space itself comes from it. This also means something else that is deeply counterintuitive. When astronomers say that galaxies are moving away from each other, they do not mean that galaxies are flying through space like shrapnel from a bomb. They mean that space itself is stretching. The distances between galaxies increase not because galaxies are racing through a static arena, but because the arena itself, space, is part of the evolving rendered slice. There is no space for space to expand into. Space is not inside something bigger. Space is the thing that is changing. A useful analogy is not an explosion, but the surface of a balloon being inflated. The dots on the surface move away from each other, not because they are crawling across the surface, but because the surface itself is expanding. And just as importantly, on the surface itself, there is no center of expansion. Every point sees every other point moving away. The Big Bang is like that, except it is not happening in space. It is the beginning of space itself. Now let's return to time because this is where the deepest confusion lives. In everyday life, time feels like a universal river flowing in which all events are carried along. But in cosmology, time is part of the universe. It is part of the dimensional slice that is being rendered. So the Big Bang is not something that happened at a time. It is the beginning of time, which means there is no earlier moment hiding behind it. Not because something is missing, but because earlier is a concept that only exists once time exists. Again, asking what happened before the Big Bang is a category error. We are taking a concept that only applies inside the rendered world and trying to use it at the boundary where the rendered world itself begins. We see the same mistake in other places in physics. People ask what is inside a black hole singularity. They ask what a particle is really doing before it is measured. Again and again, we try to push familiar concepts past the place where they apply. But the Big Bang is not a hidden region. It is not a curtain we haven't pulled back yet. It is a boundary, not in space, but in what can be meaningfully described in space-time terms at all. The human mind resists this because it wants continuity. It wants there to always be something before, something behind, something underneath. It wants the universe to always be a story that continues in the same way. But sometimes the deepest answer is not, there is something there and we can't see it. Sometimes the deepest answer is, this is where seeing itself begins. So let's say this again very clearly and from another angle. The Big Bang is not the beginning of matter in space. It is the beginning of space itself. The Big Bang is not the beginning of events in time. It is the beginning of time itself. It is not something that happened in the universe. It is the boundary at which the universe, as a space-time structure, as a dimensional slice, becomes renderable at all. This also clears up another deeply rooted misconception. People often say that the universe is expanding into something, but there is no outside. There is no surrounding emptiness. There is no container. Space itself is what is expanding. In DRT terms, the geometry of the rendered slice is changing. It is not moving into anything. So what happened before the Big Bang? In DRT terms, the most precise answer is, there was no before yet. Not because something is missing, but because this is the place where before and after themselves first become part of the rendered world. And this brings us to a deeper unifying perspective. In DRT terms, phenomena like the Big Bang, black holes, and singularities are not exotic places or hidden realms waiting to be explored. They are boundaries of the rendered dimensional slice, horizons beyond which our ordinary concepts of space, time, causality, and explanation simply stop applying. They are not mysteries in the sense of something is there but we don't yet understand it. They are limits in the sense that understanding itself no longer has a foothold. When physics reaches these horizons, it is not discovering strange new objects. It is discovering the edges of what can be meaningfully rendered and described at all. And in a deeper sense, these boundaries are not only cosmological. They are also the boundaries of human comprehension and even human imagination. We are conscious biological interfaces, evolved to navigate a particular slice of reality, not to apprehend reality in its entirety. Our senses and our minds did not evolve for truth in any absolute sense. They evolved for survival. What we can perceive, model, and conceptualize is therefore not the whole of what exists, but only the portion of reality that can be rendered into the form a human organism can use. The Big Bang and black holes remind us of this in a particularly dramatic way. They are not just edges of space-time. They are edges of what a creature like us can meaningfully think about at all. The universe is not a story that starts at page 1. It is a story for which page 1 is the first possible page. There is no preface. There is no earlier chapter. And this may be one of the deepest lessons both modern cosmology and dimensional rendering theory have to offer. Some questions are not unsolved. They are misplaced. They are built from concepts that only apply inside the world and then aimed at the place where the world itself begins. The Big Bang is not an explosion in the past. It is the edge of space-time. And like all true edges, it does not hide another place. It marks the place where place and time themselves first appear. And with that, I want to thank you for listening. If you found this episode thought-provoking, I hope you'll come back for future episodes, where we'll continue taking deep dives into some of the biggest questions about the nature of reality, time, and consciousness. If you have thoughts, questions, or disagreements, I'd love to hear them in the comments. And if you want to help this new show reach more people, your engagement really does make a difference in how the algorithms treat it. This has been Dimensions. Until next time, my name is Bill.